Hey guys, this is Christian, and today I'm gonna show you some of the new AI features in my absolute favorite dev tool Warp, which just transformed from a terminal application to a full agentic development environment. I've been playing around with this recently, and I was honestly really impressed by how useful it is to automate the deployment workflows for my container projects, troubleshoot issues on my servers, and even for software development. This is absolutely crazy. For example, some of you might know that in one of the last videos, I've created my own small containerized Python script that displays information about my Raspberry Pi's Kubernetes cluster on a small LCD screen, and I've used Warp and AI to enhance this script. It completely coded a brand new function for it and built the new container images fully autonomously without me having to write even a single line of code. It is absolutely mind-blowing. And I believe this is a great demonstration of the practical use cases of AI for software development and IT in general. So if you're up for some cool examples and projects, let's get started, and thanks Warp for sponsoring this video. Alright, so now let's get started, and if you want to get access to all the new and exciting features in Warp, you just need to download the latest version of it. Everything is built right into this application, which originally started as a terminal app, but now transformed into a full agentic development environment. And what that means, we will shortly cover in a few minutes. I just want to say that Warp is available for free on all platforms, including macOS, Linux, and also Windows, so now everybody can just use it. And by the way, the team also listened to our community feedback and got rid of this weird login requirement. So now you can use Warp without having to sign in with an account. And that even is working for AI requests, which include many industry-leading LLMs such as Claude, GPT, Gemini, or DeepSeek. The only thing that it doesn't support yet at the time of recording this video is local LLMs. However, I've already discussed this topic with the CEO of Warp, and he said to me that they are definitely working on implementing this in the near future. Warp also recently got a complete refresh of their AI integration. So now you have a separate block in Warp where you can track conversations, use voice input, or even attach images. And there you can also now select your desired AI model to develop code, answer questions, or run tasks, and that even fully autonomously. You probably hear I'm very excited about it, but I also know that some of you might have concerns about using AI for these type of tasks. And honestly, at first, I was also a bit skeptical if letting an AI execute commands and develop code fully autonomously in a production environment is actually a good idea. But Warp proved me wrong. It does a pretty good job with its command execution rules and permission settings, so you can very specifically decide and configure what the AI is allowed to do on your system and what not. And the more I use it in my day-to-day workflow, the more I build confidence in it. Because when you think about it, in the past, a terminal has always been the primary interface for humans to tell computers what they should do by using commands or scripts. But now Warp completely transformed the way how you can interact with your computer, and that opens up many exciting possibilities. Like, you can still type in specific commands and instructions like in any other terminal that you've used before, but you can also start describing in natural language what you want the system to execute, and Warp will automatically recognize to treat it as a prompt for an AI instruction and build commands, answer questions, maybe about specific outputs in your command line. And especially in software development, this is super interesting because tools like Warp, but also Claude Code or OpenAI's Codex CLI, they demonstrate how modern development can be done without relying on IDEs like Cursor or Windsurf, for example. But even if you're not a software developer like me, I can also tell you it is super practical for server administration or troubleshooting. And I'm sure this is just the beginning. Yeah, these tools are improving and changing so fast that it's, I think, now the right time to try it out and familiarize yourself with AI technology. But yeah, that's just my personal opinion. Let's jump right into some real-world examples that I have discovered so you can get a better understanding how this technology works and how you might use it for your own workflows. Let's start simple. When I type in what Docker containers are running on my system, you can see that Warp automatically executes the Docker ps command in the background, and after receiving the output from the command line, it can even interpret the result and present it to me in a natural response, providing more details about the output. In my case, it's providing a complete list of all the containers running on my system, along with their port numbers, their runtime, and even the project relation. Of course, this is just a super simple command that I probably could have just typed in myself, yeah? So no need to use AI here, but I promise we'll shortly cover some more complicated examples. And the cool thing is that whenever you're using AI in Warp, within the same conversation, it is always aware of all the context from previous instructions. So when I now type in stop the monitoring containers, for example, it remembers what containers were running on my system, and it knew the project relations, so it can immediately perform the desired actions on my system. And whenever it hits a point where it does need additional information, it can also automatically collect it by executing commands to do that, or ask you to provide more details, which is, in my opinion, a clever approach. By the way, the fact that Warp executes the Docker command without any confirmation from my side, this is not the default behavior. In the AI settings of Warp, you can very specifically define what the AI is allowed to execute and what not. So all the allowed commands in the allow list are just executed by the AI without any confirmation from your side. But other commands not in this list might need manual confirmation. Usually, these include actions that would change or restart services on your system. And the deny list, of course, will prevent any bad things from happening, such as the notorious rm-rf* command on Linux. And additionally, the system also tries to filter out other harmful or dangerous actions. Like if you ask it to destroy any files on your system, it usually doesn't do that. And it also recently got a few new permission settings to even better control what specifically the AI is allowed to do and access and what not. I personally think the default settings in Warp are already pretty good, so you can just use it out of the box. But if you'd like to customize this list, you can add or remove any commands and even use regular expressions. For instance, that's why I added the docker command to my allow list and added the docker rm command to the deny list, because I often use docker commands, as you probably should know when you're watching my videos. And from my experience, it has always been working great when I just let the AI execute these type of tasks without asking me all the time. However, if you're just starting to try out this technology, I still would not recommend that you just blindly run everything that the AI suggests. Yeah, you should still be aware of what it's actually doing and think about it at least a second or two before you hit the execute button. But I think this is really great in these type of situations where you know there is this particular command somehow existing, but you cannot really remember the correct flags or the syntax, or you're trying to build a more complex one-line command or a regular expression. Yeah, if you try to do that manually once, that can become really complicated. And especially in these type of scenarios, using AI to do that is just super practical and saves a lot of time. I just say give it a go. Test it, maybe not directly on your production system in the first place, but on a separate testing machine. Because another great thing about Warp is that it also fully works over SSH. So when I'm working on one of my remote testing servers like this machine here, I can also fully utilize all the cool AI features without the fear of breaking anything important. By the way, let me also demonstrate how clever Warp is when describing more complex tasks. For example, here's a prompt that should deploy a new Nginx Docker container from my famous boilerplates repository on GitHub. This is, by the way, a place where I store all my deployments, templates, and configs. You can definitely check it out and find the link in the description. I thought it would be just a good example to demonstrate how AI can fully autonomously deploy an application using these templates on one of my testing servers, and I don't have to manually download and copy all the necessary files, create the directories, and configure specific labels in the compose file for traffic and these type of things. You can ask Warp to do that completely for you. And because this is a more complex task that we're describing here, it requires a bunch of different steps that the AI needs to do. Here you can also enable a setting in Warp AI to make a plan first using its reasoning models before it's actually executing the different steps. And reasoning models are great in these scenarios because they can simulate a form of thinking process. So they don't just immediately produce an output or a command. They first think about a solution path, then they collect all the necessary information they need to accomplish it, and then decide how it gets there completely on its own, which is great for prompts like this, where many different steps and instructions need to be processed. By the way, when an AI agent is running in Warp, you can also allow it to execute all the actions fully autonomous, which means Warp runs all the necessary steps completely on its own and it's not asking you again for any confirmation. But you can really decide if you're comfortable with running everything fully autonomously, or maybe stop at some points and ask for confirmation. I think it depends really on the use case. By the way, if you're running these agents in the background, you also got a new button at the top right corner where you can see all the actions that are running in the background. And of course, you can still cancel all the tasks at any time. Honestly, every time I'm watching these agents, it's so exciting and funny, but also sometimes a bit scary to see how it behaves and how it does all the actions in the background. It really feels like watching a human administrator over a remote session who is just working on a new Docker Compose deployment. And of course, I've also tried out this for many other tasks and things I've played around with in my home lab. Sometimes it has a few problems or it gets stuck somewhere. So when that happens, you just need to jump in and redefine the task instructions or try out a different prompt. But I also found out that for many situations, when it runs into an error, it also automatically tries to troubleshoot the root cause and find ways to fix it on its own. Overall, it is really impressive how good it works. However, one tip that I'd like to give you when it comes to autonomously executing these agents is that you should provide as much context as you can. Because the more context the AI has, the smarter it is and the more accurate it can produce the output or the result that you want. Do this by either providing a good description in the prompt or by attaching code blocks as context. This is, by the way, another super cool feature, especially when you have to troubleshoot issues. Here, for example, you can see that on one of my remote servers, something doesn't quite work well. For whatever reason, the systemd service is degraded. And instead of troubleshooting this completely by myself, I thought, let's just ask Warp to do this for me. And I just attached the last block as context so it can see the output from my last command and the response to find out the reason why this is failing. I've already tested it in many other scenarios by attaching error logs from the Kubernetes tools as context, or when I had problems in a Docker container, for example, and it was almost always really helpful. Even if Warp doesn't always come up with the right solution immediately, at least you can ask it to give you a hint for things you might have to check to narrow down the problem. It is, in my opinion, always much better than just Googling it yourself. And another great tip I have for you when it comes to context, if you want Warp to recognize very specific tools, workflows, or processes that are just relevant for your specific use case or environment, but they always repeat, then you can also use knowledge rules. For example, I'm using one tool on macOS where I manage my dot files with. That is called Yedem. And this uses actually Git under the hood to pull and push my most important user config files from and to a Git repository. But of course, Warp by default doesn't really know that I'm using the tool Yedem on my system. So when I'm asking it to do anything with my dot files, it usually tries to execute Git commands. But you can teach Warp to use Yedem when it comes to managing dot files, and that you can do in the knowledge rules. Just give it a basic description, something like, whenever you have to manage dot files on the local device, then use the tool Yedem, which also works similar to Git. So then Warp also knows how this tool works under the hood. And now when I'm enabling these knowledge rules, whenever I'm asking a question about, for example, what was the last change in my dot files repository, then Warp is always aware of this knowledge and automatically uses the right tool to give me the correct output. And you can, of course, extend this to so many other things. For example, if you're using specific file names that differ from how you would usually do it, just define it in a knowledge rule. So these two tips already should help you to customize your environment and make Warp more effective in AI prompts so that you don't always have to explain the same things to the AI. It's also saving a lot of time. But the most extremely powerful feature when it comes to AI context is using MCP servers. For those of you who don't know what MCP servers are, this stands for Model Context Protocol. And this is a standardized way to add context from third-party sources to your AI models. For example, you got connected to your company's documentation server or knowledge base system to help Warp better understand your specific environment and tools, or connected to an external API to fetch data that could be relevant for your workflows. To give you a very specific example, I have connected Warp to my Notion workspace using the Notion MCP server. And if you've watched my last video about the technical documentation that I'm storing in Notion, you probably should know that this is exactly the place where I document and manage all of my home lab projects, the tasks, and the infrastructure. This literally adds superpowers to Warp because it then knows everything that I have documented in Notion about my infrastructure. So when I start describing a task where, for example, I say, test the connectivity to all of my testing servers in my home lab, using the context from the Notion MCP server, then Warp can automatically figure out on its own where this is documented, and it then knows everything that I've written down. It knows the IP addresses, it knows the DNS names, it knows the applications and the deployments. I don't have to provide all this information in the prompt, or it doesn't need to collect it by using commands. This is really so amazing, and it saves you, again, so much time. By the way, another tip that I can give you when you're playing around a lot with Warp and you often have repeating prompts or tasks, just like in my first example with the new application deployment of a Docker Compose template, you can store these type of prompts with variable placeholders in Warp Drive. Warp Drive is also one of my most favorite features. So here you can create Markdown-based notebooks, workflows, environment variables, and now also store AI prompts, and you can even easily share it with your entire team or reuse them later. Okay guys, so I know this was already a lot, but I really wanted to show you some cool and interesting use cases for sysadmins, DevOps engineers, or maybe home lab enthusiasts. However, the most impressive feature that I just recently discovered, and why Warp now calls itself a fully agentic development environment, is the Codebase Context, because Warp aims to revolutionize the way how we write code and develop software. I think most people are somewhat familiar with IDEs like VS Code or some of these new AI-powered IDEs like Cursor or Windsurf, but Warp is going a different direction. It's working heavily on these new AI features for developing code, but right into your CLI without having to use an IDE at all. For example, if you enable the code context checkbox in Warp, it automatically knows when you're working in a Git repository, and then it can index all of the project files to easily develop new functions or change things in the code. By the way, in the documentation of Warp, it is also described how this function actually works without storing the index of your code base context on their servers. So it is also great for private projects. Let me show you a quick example with my Python project that I told you about in the beginning of this video. This is really an actual project that I were using on my home lab Raspberry Pi Kubernetes cluster. I know one day I want to replace this cluster, but I thought this would be a great example, and certainly you can use or apply this technique to any other software project that you're working on. So this small script, for example, that I have opened here is running in a Docker container by using Docker Compose, and this can display information about a Raspberry Pi system on a small LCD screen. So my script uses a bunch of well-known third-party libraries, but also classes and functions that I've written myself. So an AI model usually would not know how my custom script is working, and it first has to index and understand all the Python files and functions that I've created. For instance, this function here displays the current CPU utilization on the LCD screen when the script is running. And I thought it would be nice to not only show a percentage value like it is doing now, but also the CPU load on the LCD screen. So I just tried to ask Warp if it could help me to write a new function module for that specific task and move the memory utilization into a separate module. So it had to change one file, and it even had to create a new file with a new function in the same structure how I've written the script. And here you can see it first comes up with a plan using the reasoning model because I've enabled that in the settings, and then I just executed it in the autonomous mode to see what happens and how it's doing its magic. And I don't want to go through all of the individual steps, but I will show you some highlights here. So here you can see that it was gathering all the necessary information about the project on its own, then adding new lines to the code functions and files, and created this new memory module file. What is also super cool, it even started to change my documentation files, so the README files that I have created for this project, and it was even updating the configuration examples in there so that it automatically changed the examples to use the new functions that it has written. And I was really surprised how well this worked without relying on any interaction from my side. So I just gave it the task and it came up with a solution in just a few minutes. So sometimes, as I said, when it runs into an error, you might need to refine the task or jump in, give it more context. But in this example, it just worked perfectly, yeah? I also continued working on this project because I was so excited, and I thought, let it just do all the other steps, like building a new Docker container from that updated script, and then publish the changes on the GitHub repository. And as you can see, this also worked great. I think part of the reason why this worked so well in this example was it was really easy for Warp to know how the program works and how it should create the container because I had created the Docker files before and so on. And what also certainly helps is if you're writing code in general, it is always good to use meaningful variable names and function names, or even add comments to your code. So all this information the AI can use to provide more accurate and better results. So honestly, guys, I don't know what to say about this. I'm really speechless. Yeah, I didn't expect that this is so good. Just imagine you could do this for even larger projects. I haven't really tested this because, as I said, I'm not a professional software developer. I don't have so many software projects that I'm doing. But yeah, I think it's up to you how you use it and how you think about it. I hope I got you at least interested in Warp and that you just want to try it out yourself. Again, it is completely free. You got a bunch of free tokens in Warp and it doesn't even require any login. So just check it out. And as always, thank you so much for watching. A big thanks goes out to all of the supporters on my YouTube channel. You guys are just amazing. And of course, I'm going to catch you in the next video. Take care. Bye bye.